Good afternoon. Hello, everybody. Welcome to the Adorama event space. My name is Debbie Gilbert. I'm Regional Director of American Photographic Artists, New York chapter. And in case you're not familiar with American Photographic Artists, also known as APA, we have a member sitting right here in the first row. We are a trade organization for professional photographers and aspiring photographers. And we're all about helping photographers be more successful via education, advocacy, and community. And if you're not a member, we'd love for you to join. Go to apany.com and join us. And Seth is going to be putting a link in the feed for you. And Adorama is also about helping photographers be more successful. And so we're really thrilled to be partnering with Adorama for these once-a-month workshops. And today, we have Tom Franklin, who is an amazing sports photographer, also a photojournalist. He's like, to use a sports analogy, he's like a utility player. He can shoot all kinds of stuff. Sports isn't what he's best known for. You'll talk about the one image you're best known for, but he's someone who can shoot anything. But he's also excellent at sports, and he's going to have all kinds of tips for you. And so we're ready to get going. So thank you, Tom.
Thank you, Debbie. Thanks for having me. Thank you, Seth. Welcome, everybody. I'm really delighted to be here today, and I want to thank Debbie and the APA and Adorama for hosting this. Sports and photography, two of my favorite subjects to talk about, and I'm really passionate about both, and in particular photography. So I'm really delighted to be here, and I'm going to share some of my work with you, and I'm also going to offer some tips for photographers out there who are trying to establish themselves in the field of sports photography, or maybe you're just getting started. So I'm going to use a couple of sports analogies throughout the presentation, and I would say I'm a five-tool player, Debbie. And so today's lineup today is I'll do a little leading off, and I'll tell you a little bit about myself, my background, and some of my experience. I'll show you a short highlight reel of my photography, my sports photography in particular. And then we'll talk about image types in the area of sports photography. We'll get into a little bit of the theory behind what kind of images are most popular. Then we'll talk about game day coverage, what it's like to cover a live sporting event, and offer some tips in that particular area. And then we'll talk a little bit about how you get to be good at this, right, and how you develop skills and become a professional and proficient in the area of sports photography. And then I'll leave questions for the very end. Those of you who are keeping track at home, please leave me a message in the chat. I see some familiar names right there, which is really pretty wonderful. So we'll have some questions at the end, or maybe we'll jump some questions in the middle. So as Debbie mentioned, I'm a professional photojournalist. I have covered a lot of sports in my career, but I'm primarily a news photographer and a college educator. I teach at Montclair State University just across the river in New Jersey. I'm originally from New York, and most of the professional work that I've done has been in New Jersey and New York. But I'm really passionate about photography. I also am a video storyteller. I've made several documentary films in the area of video, which I think photography was good training and preparation for that. I also got my drone pilot's license a couple of years ago, and so I've dabbled in that a little bit. And I'm a sports junkie. I'm a long-suffering Mets fan, Knicks fan, Rangers fan. The Giants, who've had some success, has been kind of rough last couple of years, but I'm a big sports fan. Here's my contact information. I'll share that again at the end. You can find me on social media as well as my website. And then, professionally right now I spend most of my time teaching at Montclair State, but I do projects. So I've moved away from covering daily news and sports on a regular basis to a more part-time basis, and I teach. I teach at Montclair State. I teach classes in photojournalism, multimedia, and visual storytelling, and other areas of journalism. I've done this for a long time. I've been making pictures for well over 30 years professionally, and I'm going to share some of those experiences with you today. I've also worked 24 years for the Bergen Record in New Jersey, which is now owned by Gannett, USA Today. And so a lot of the work that I'm going to show you today was assignment work that I did for the newspaper. And we covered a lot of news, a lot of sports, and a lot of entertainment while I worked there. I've won a lot of awards for photography and video, not to brag, but just show I've been around, and the work that I've done has been recognized, and I'm really proud of that. Covering sports. So that's a picture of me after the Super Bowl at MetLife Stadium a few years back. I've covered a lot of games in the big three sports, including all the championship games in all those sports. I covered 4 or 5 World Series, 3 Super Bowls, 2 NBA Finals, and those are the big assignments, right? Those are the pinnacle of doing this kind of work, is to cover those big events, right? They are the most meaningful, the most watched, and oftentimes the most challenging. I've also covered the Stanley Cup Finals twice, the US Open in golf and tennis, the PGA Championship in golf, and the NCAA basketball and football, as well as MLS soccer. But I've also covered a lot of local sports. So I know talking about professional sports may not actually be realistic or feasible for a lot of people out there, but local sports definitely is. So I'm gonna straddle between those two in this discussion today. Here's a really funny picture of me covering the Jets. That's me and all the gear on the left on a really cold day at Giants Stadium, chasing Chad Pennington, with Jets quarterback, after a Jet game. And then that's me and one of my shooting partners, Tyson Trish, great sports photographer in his own right, celebrating after we had transmitted all our pictures after the Super Bowl, after the Giants beat the Patriots for the first time. All right, my work. I'm going to play a short video for you now. It's got a little bit of sound here. This is only a couple of minutes long, and this is kind of a little recap of the type of work that I've done. All right. So it was really a real big pleasure to me to go through my archive and gather all my sports photographs and put that together for you. I'd be happy to take questions at the end about any of those pictures, but I'm going to go through and take a look at a couple of other pictures and give you some more information before we get to that part. I'm probably best known for this photograph, right? And this is a photograph I took on September 11th. This photograph has appeared on a US postage stamp. And I tell people that making this picture was in many ways very similar to shooting sports. And people look at me like, well, what are you talking about, right? This is one of the most horrible days in our country's history. And yes, of course, that's it. And I don't mean to belittle that in any way. But it's the approach photographically is very similar. You quickly size up a situation. You make some very quick decisions in terms of which lens you're going to use, what your exposure is going to be, whether you want to have shallow depth of field or great depth of field, whether you need a fast shutter speed or a slow. And then you choose the best angle, and in this particular case, very quickly, and you document what you see. It's very similar to shooting a play in football. In this particular case, flag was raised after a short amount of time where they spent fumbling with the flag before they attached it to the pole. They raised it up, watched it, and stepped down, and the play was over. And so it was a very similar type of photograph. Here's the whole sequence of photos that led to that. And in looking at my photos for this presentation, you can see it's like the action of a play in a lot of ways. You know, you can see how it's beginning. They're beginning to fumble with the flag. They get the flag on the rope. They're hoisting it up. And then there's a reaction. In this particular case, there was not much reaction at all. The firemen stepped down. You could see in the lower two left pictures, the firemen walked right past me. I walked past them. And then I got the aftermath, which is the flag flapping in the wind. Okay. Image types, right? So image types. Let's talk a little bit about the theory, right? So you want to be a sports photographer or you want to improve your sports photography. Well, how do you do it? Well, let's begin by talking about the different types of photographs there are in the area of sports, right? So the first one is action, right? Well, this is like duh, right? This is like pretty obvious to everybody. You got to follow the ball and you got to shoot the action and you got to record it in a way that's visually interesting. We're looking for the peak moments of a particular play, right? Any photograph of action that's not that peak moment is probably not going to have the same kind of impact. So it's got to be pretty precise. In most cases, you're going to shoot a burst of photos, right? You're going to have your motor drive on and you're going to shoot a bunch of frames and pick the best picture. Usually it's around the peak action of that particular play. Most times it's going to include a ball, right? An action picture without the ball, if it's a ball sport, not going to have the same level of impact. Both sides of the competition, sharpness, drama, intensity, maximum impact, and faces. These are all the things we want to try and capture in a good sports action photograph, right? Peak moment, right? Two iconic players there, by the way, Allen Iverson and Jason Kidd, right? It's a peak action play, right? In this particular case, shooting in a torrential rainpour, right? For photographers, shooting in the rain, not always fun, right? But sometimes the pictures are great. And this was a game on a warm night at Giant Stadium where the pictures were great because the light was just illuminating the rain and the ball became very slippery. Haven't shot a lot of rodeo in my career, but I loved this picture and it was fun to shoot something that was a little bit different than the big three sports. Right? Again, peak action, faces, intensity are what we're looking for. Love this picture how the Giant Stadium was real grass for a couple of years. It was a disaster. And this is Tiki Barber running and the turf just being kicked up. I loved how it's just like frozen in the air. So you got action pictures. Second type, image type, are reaction plays. You got a play and then you have a reaction to that play. We are now very accustomed to seeing that on television, right? You see players all the time performing in a way that's, performative. Well, with our photography, we want to try and capture that. That's where the best pictures lie oftentimes. Usually it's in reaction to a play. Usually it is an important play that has an impact on the outcome of the game. And it needs to be sharp, it needs to be dramatic, it needs to be emotional, and we want to capture faces. Picture of Derek Jeter from the 2001 World Series. I'll talk a little bit in a little while about the difference between shooting from an elevated position. Here I am in the stands in a photographer's position above the field, long lens looking down on the action, as opposed to a field level picture, right? Shot from the photo well. This was at Citi Field out in Queens. And basketball, which is typically shot from courtside, not too many elevated positions in basketball. Okay? Again, faces, peak moments, reaction, emotion, those are the things that we're looking for. Outcomes, right? So we want to, with sports photography, the outcome of the game, the outcome of the competition plays a factor not only in how we make our pictures, but also how we edit them. And so outcomes, the news organization I used to shoot a lot of my sports for, they were primarily concerned with the pictures mirroring the outcome of the game, right? So Derek Jeter here, right, is after the World Series in '99, right? The Yankees won so many World Series, I get them confused. The Yankees celebrating on the field after having won the World Series is a picture made running onto the field after the game ended. It's one of the most fun part. My favorite parts of covering sports is that running onto the field and be able to make an intimate photograph like that with a wide-angle lens. Again, faces, intimacy, emotion, these are the things that we're trying to look for. Again, the outcome. Yankees won the World Series. Patrick Ewing and the Knicks advanced to the NBA Finals. This is Jabril Peppers, who went on to become a player for the Giants, but this is him back in high school. He won a state championship. He was somewhat of a controversial high school player, a very talented one. State championship, again in the pouring rain at Giant Stadium. And then one of my favorite pictures, not because it's a great photo in particular, but it was the Subway Series, the World Series between the Yankees and the Mets in 2000. And so I'm a New York fan. I'm a Mets and a Yankees fan. I don't want to hear anybody telling me I can't be both. I am. I lean a little bit more towards the Mets, and the Yankees got the better of the Mets during that World Series. But this is the game-winning run. This decided the outcome of the World Series. And I love how Posada, who was the Yankee catcher, reacting from having scored the run to the Mets catcher, Mike Piazza. I don't like the fact you can't see Piazza's face in this picture, but I think you get the message, right? You get the outcome by looking at that photograph. So those pictures are largely about the thrill of victory, right? But there's also the agony of defeat, right? Particularly if your team or the team that you're covering loses, well, your editor may not want to see thrill of victory pictures from a team that they don't have a connection to. So outcomes can oftentimes be the agony of defeat, and these sometimes make great pictures, right? And so here are a couple of examples of that. In this particular case, this field hockey picture, you got both in the same picture. It was wonderful when that happens, right? So you have the thrill of victory of the player in goal, jumping in the air, and then the agony of defeat of the player on the left. So one of my favorite pictures there, local sports. All right, the next image type are portraits, right? One of my favorites, right? So portraits are where we as the photographer have somewhat control over the photograph. Now portraits don't necessarily need to be in a studio. Like we're in a studio right now. We got nice lighting here. We got a nice backdrop. Pretty nice backdrop, right, Sam? And so here in this kind of studio, you could set up a nice portrait.
Just walk out of here. Just leave.
A portrait setting. But portraits could be taken in the course of an action or a game, right? So they can take many different forms. But the bottom line, the common denominator here is that you're going to convey some sort of emotion or expression about who that player is, right? We want to try and convey personality with the portrait photographs. So I think you all know this guy, right? So this was taken before the NBA All-Star game at Madison Square Garden. Right, and Jordan didn't smile on the court a lot, right? But it was an all-star game, and players were kind of like being kind of lighthearted about it. And so, catching a nice expression out of Jordan was not only rare, but I love the crispness of that composition. This is a picture of Michael Strahan, now a famous TV personality, but it was also a player with the Giants. And this was actually a piece of trivia here. Does anybody know where this picture was taken? Holson's, which was the infamous location of the final scene of The Sopranos, purely coincidental. But it was actually a picture I took of Strahan a couple of weeks after 9/11, and you can see you can kind of see he's wearing the NYPD hat. And I actually had a really nice exchange with him, and I ended up sending a signed copy of my flag raising picture. And the next time I saw him, which was in the tunnel after a Giants game, he remembered me, and he came over and introduced me to his then wife. And that was really pretty nice that he remembered that. And then there's a picture I just posted on my Instagram 2 days ago. And this is Kobe Bryant's dad, Joe Bryant, who was also an NBA player. A portrait I had shot of him a few years ago, and he just passed away this week. And I just love the lighting. He was playing in a reincarnated version of the ABA, and that was taken when he was doing that. Portraits, one of my favorite pictures, Mariano Rivera, 1999 World Series, Yankee Stadium, and it started to snow, right? That's what happens in the cold weather, right? And I just love how the light is really captured there beautifully, and he was looking up at a foul ball, right? It was a meaningless play in the game, but there's just something about his expression and the aesthetics of this picture that really speaks to me, and that's one of my favorite pictures. Sugar Ray Leonard, portrait, I had photographed him very early in my career, and he actually liked me coming around taking. He was training for a fight. He ended up losing that fight, and he retired after that fight. But he came out of retirement a couple of times after that. But at the time, it was a big fight because he retired, and he didn't mind having his picture taken, and he encouraged me to stay all day, and I did, and it was kind of cool. Boxing's a lot of fun to photograph. Those of you who are interested in sports photography. Boxing, man, it's just so real and authentic, and the pictures are usually really great. Portraits, right? This is a feature story about the diggers in volleyball, right? That's a position, right? Who knew? I didn't know this at the time, but it's a position in volleyball. And so these were all the top diggers in Bergen County in New Jersey, and a nice set-up portrait of them in like a sand pit, volleyball sand pit. So really like that picture as well. So those are all examples of portraits. I really believe that if you want to get good at any type of photography, you need to study, right? You need to study the work of other people. And I can't stand up here and talk to you about sports photography without talking about some of the legendary sports photographers that have come before us. And Walter Yost of Sports Illustrated is perhaps the most legendary of all photographers. And he was great at all aspects of photography, in particular sports action, but also portraiture. And I really loved this portrait of Joe Montana. We were talking about Joe Montana earlier. And I love this. If anyone is wondering how this picture was made, because it looks a little funky, right? There's a little bit of a visceral thing going on here. I don't know exactly how he made it, but my guess is slow shutter speed, dark room, dragged the shutter, and had some sort of background. I don't know if that was actually taken in the stadium or not, but it looks like it was taken in the stadium. But this could have been done in a studio, maybe with some cut seamless paper. I just love the picture, right? It's a nice portrait, beautifully lit, nice composition, nice dark and shadows. Walter Yost, everybody. If you're gonna shoot sports, you gotta know who he is. Portraits, right? Oh, I found this guy, I don't know him, Brad Deal. Brad Deal, if you're out there, I love your work, man. He is a great follow on Instagram. I'm going to his Instagram here real quick here. So his Instagram, he not only posts his photos, he shows you how he did it. And it's all these really cool setups of players doing stuff to get these dramatic action shots. Heavily lit, usually underexposed, so the color saturation is real heavy. And he captures these really cool, very commercial type of portraits. So I show this to my students all the time, because if you want to learn how to do this, he's telling you how to do it, right? And it's not complicated, right? He's, in most cases, using one or two simple camera lights. Right, here we are at Adorama. You can get a fairly inexpensive off-camera flash and simulate this kind of lighting. He's got everything on his page. He shows you how he makes his shots, and he's a great Instagram follow. And I don't know him, but I just love learning, right? We're all works in progress, and I like looking at his work there to get ideas, and I love his creativity as well. Brad Deal, everybody. All right, the next type of picture image types are picture stories, right? So this is the next level of visual storytelling, right? Finding an interesting subject and producing a body of work on that particular subject. If you want to impress an editor, if you are trying to make a career doing work in photography, work on picture stories. Editors are going to want to see it, right? It's not easy to shoot sports action, but there's a lot of us out there who can do it, right? The equipment is so good, the autofocus is so good. It is easier than ever. I'm not saying it's easy to be good at it, but it's accessible to everybody. But finding a good picture story, spending time with the subject and developing a story narrative, that's the next level of visual storytelling. I like working on picture stories as passion projects. At my university, sports during COVID was terrible, right? There would be games one day, and then a player would get sick, and they'd have to go into lockdown, and games would be postponed. And it was a very stressful, difficult period. So this is a series of pictures taken right at the end towards the end of COVID, when games were starting to be resumed. Fans in the stands had to wear masks over their mouths. Coaches had to wear these plastic screens. You know, I've done some coaching in my life. I cannot imagine having a coach with one of those plastic masks over my face. And so there was lots of strangeness within the game, players not really wanting to mix it up as much. And so I was trying to show that with this photo essay here. And players would miss significant periods of time when they would test positive. And so my university, Montclair State, ended up losing in their conference finals. And this photo essay was from that time period. So picture stories, we'll kind of circle back to this in a little bit. It's a good way to really set yourself apart and catch the attention of editors. Okay, part 4, game day. All right, so we've gone over the picture types. You have a pretty good sense of, you know, the different types of photographs that are commonly made in the area of sports photography. Now let's talk about some tips on how to cover a live event. All right, this is the part where you want to get your notepad out and take some notes here. All right, first thing, preparation, right? Failing to prepare is preparing to fail, right? John Wooden famously said that. I love saying to my students before the eyeballs roll back in the back of their head. But you've got to prepare. You've got to know the teams that you're photographing, know what the storylines are, who are the key players, and how you're going, who you identify them, usually by numbers. Get a roster before the game, keep that roster handy, circle the names of the players you know you have to get, shoot them during warm-up so you know you have something in the bag, but keep an eye on them throughout the course of the game. Cannot emphasize enough how important it is to prepare. Access. This might be the hardest part, right? You got to get access. So professional sports, even college sports, can be hard to get a press pass. If you work with a news organization, you're going to have a little bit easier time. But if you're a freelancer or you're just trying to get your feet wet, it can be a bit of a challenge. But reach out to the media relations person of a particular team, introduce yourself, send them a body of work, show them that you're serious, and ask for a press pass and get started. It's also a good way for you to build relationships. So when you reach out to a media director, tell them who you are, right? Hey, I'm a college student or a recent college grad. I'm trying to get started in sports photography field. Can you give me a pass? I'd love to cover a game. I'll post it on social media, and I'll be sure to tag the team. These would be good strategies to apply. I would encourage you not to give your work away. If the sports director asks you for copies of the picture, that would be a hard no for me. Right, I would say, hey, I'll share them on social media. If anyone wants to license the photographs from me, we can have a discussion at a later time. After you get the access, figure out where the best positions are. There's a big difference both in how your pictures are going to look and what equipment you're going to need if you're shooting from the field level, right? Me looking at you, we're at field level, or if we're way above shooting looking down. If you're going to an elevated position, you're going to need a longer lens. So think about what the positions are. I always like to do both during the course of a game. If that's an option to you, go for it. Seek out the best positions. Equipment. We're here at Adorama. I'm not going to spend a lot of time talking about equipment when the experts are right out there, and I know those of you out there in YouTube land are not here right now, but go to your store and test out some equipment. I'm not a big gear guy. I really feel like I can make good pictures with any camera you put in my hands, but the better your equipment, the better your pictures are going to be. You know what your budget is, get a good camera. Cameras matter, lenses matter even more. Get yourself good glass, long glass, fast glass. Those are the keys to really good pictures in terms of the equipment. If you're going to cover a live game, minimum of 2 camera bodies, right? If you have 2 camera bodies. One's got a wide angle zoom or maybe a middle zoom, and the others you're going to put on your long lens, the longest lens you have. And the longest lens should be supported by a monopod. The monopod goes on the lens, not the camera. Nothing says amateur photographer more than a monopod on the camera because it's not really helping you steady the camera. Monopod gives you steadiness as well as lifts some of the weight off your neck, hands, and shoulders. Okay, so equipment. If you're transmitting from a game, most photographers, sports photographers who are working on deadline, they're setting up a laptop just like I am. They're shooting, they're sending pretty much in a constant flow. If that's part of your workflow, you got to figure that out. Get there early. Set up your stuff, connect to your whatever Wi-Fi or internet you're using, and run some tests. All right, settings, right? You got to know your gear, right? If you're going to do sports photography, you really need to know manual exposure. Could you get by in auto? I guess you could probably get by, but no professional photographer is shooting sports in any type of automatic or program mode. You need to work in manual. And I would say 95% of the sports that I shoot, I'm in complete manual exposure, but I will on occasion shoot in aperture or shutter priority. For example, if I'm shooting a soccer game, half the field, and it's a daytime game, half the field's in sun, half the field's in shadow. Well, the ball is going to be going back and forth between the sun and the shade, sun and the shade. Well, how do you adjust for that exposure-wise? Shutter priority. Set your shutter to something really fast, 1,000th of a second. Set your ISO to a medium number, let the camera decide what the aperture is, and this way that camera is going to adjust to the change in light much faster than you. So manual modes. If you don't understand manual modes, that's step number 1 if you're going to do sports photography. All right, good eye. Notice the baseball, the sports jargon here. You got to follow the ball, right? If you're starting out in sports, just follow the ball. Anticipate and follow the ball. Shoot with the longest lens that you're comfortable with and just follow that action. Once a play occurs, don't let up. Look for the reaction after the play. After a big play, there's usually a reaction. And then after you got the reaction, get numbers. On your camera, photograph the numbers of the players. You may need to provide captions afterwards. Well, if you don't know the players, numbers are going to be your key, and then you can match up the numbers with the names on your roster. I would also say be mindful of your background. I'll show examples of that in just a minute. Excuse me. If you're shooting professional sports, the backgrounds suck, right? There's advertising everywhere. It's by design, right? Advertisers want their logos to be seen. They're bad for your pictures, good for the advertiser, bad for the photographers. And so I find that sometimes if you shoot from an elevated position, well, now you're taking that advertising out of the equation for most pictures because you're looking down and you're going to have the grass, the ice, or the field as your backdrop. The downside of shooting from an elevated position is you don't have the same kind of intimacy with your pictures. You don't get the same kind of facial expressions. And so there's a little bit of a trade-off. If you're shooting from a field level, I like to get low. I kneel. If I'm shooting, I'm wearing knee pads, and I kneel 75% of the time. Why kneeling? Well, kneeling is going to give you a little lower elevation and might minimize some of that advertising in the background. Not everybody can kneel. Equipment's heavy. If you're shooting football or soccer, you're moving around a lot. Yeah, it's physical. Being a sports photographer, it helps to be in shape and to be physical because you got to move around a lot. Play your position. All right, I just talked about the difference between field levels and elevated positions. It depends on the game, right? I showed you before that photo of Derek Jeter from the 2001 World Series. Well, I was working with another photographer on my team. He was at the field level, I was in the elevated position. Some games, I had the best spot, right? They was right above the Yankee bench, and when they came to the bench, when a lot of the celebration happens, I was in a good position. But my partner got much better field level photographs in that game because he's going to get more intimate. They're going to fill the frame more with the action. Generally, closer is better, right? Robert Capa famously said, if your pictures aren't good enough, you're not close enough. And the same goes with sports photography to a certain degree. Anticipate the action and move. I always felt my best sport was football. I understood football, I could anticipate the action, and of course, there's a little bit of a guessing game whether to decide whether you want to be in front of the action where the team is heading or behind the action. And sometimes you have to make educated decisions about which the best position is. But the position and the angles that you take will matter greatly. Moments, right? I've showed you a good number of photographs already. Yeah, we're trying to capture moments, right? The storytelling outcomes of games, the meaning of a particular competition is what we're trying to capture. And where does that come from? The faces and the emotions. As frontal as possible, but capturing those pivotal moments and the reactions to them are really important. If you're covering a competition, particularly if it's a big game, you got to have the critical goal or the big score. Your editors are going to demand it, and that's usually where the good pictures lie. And then last, play out of position. After you're shooting an event for a good number of shots and you've got a good number of pictures in the bag already, experiment. Move to a different spot. Take some chances, right? Be creative. This is your opportunity to get something different. As long as you have the stuff that you need, that your editor is going to want already captured, that's the time to experiment. And this is when I would usually like to shoot slow shutter speed pictures or take other types of chances with my pictures. Yes, question.
All right, so Michael in the chat's asking, what about lighting indoors? I tend to find a lot of grain in my photos when shooting basketball. How could I prevent grain as much as possible?
All right, great question, Michael. So one of the real advantages we have today is that cameras perform significantly better in low light, right? We can shoot in high ISOs beyond the numbers that we would ever even attempt in the past. A lot of those pictures I've shown you today were in the days where you really didn't go past 1600, maybe 3200. Today, I know photographers who start at 3200, right? And so the cameras today are a huge advantage for sports photographers. I think as a general rule of thumb, keep that ISO as low as feasibly possible. Your photos are going to have less grain, less noise. You're going to have a little bit truer colors, but you have some flexibility now because of the advancement in the cameras. So general rule, low ISO, fast shutter speeds, wide open aperture. That's the trifecta in sports photography. I'll say that again. Fast shutter speeds. 500th of a second is the slowest you want to shoot live sports with. 1,000 is pretty good. 2,000 would be even better. Aperture, wide open. Why? You want shallow depth of field. I always shot, that's usually my beginning spot. I want to shoot at f2.8 if my lens opens to f2.8 so I can get that shallowest depth of field. And of course, the focus is going to be more critical at that aperture, but that's going to lend itself to really good images. And of course, keep that ISO as low as possible. Speaking of shutter speed, did you all see that picture from the Trump assassination attempt by Doug Mills, the New York Times? He shot that picture and the bullet was caught 8,000th of a second. Well, I'm saying, well, I don't think I've ever shot anything at 8,000th of a second. But I'm thinking maybe it was really bright, and maybe, I don't know, I'm just kind of surmising, and maybe he wanted to get that shallow depth of field. But 8,000th of a second is really fast, and it still really wasn't even fast enough to capture the bullet, but it's there.
How much time he had to decide, and because normally you don't put it in it.
No, he must have, I don't.
Presence of mind and making it 8,000 shooting a bullet.
Well, he's a fantastic photographer, been around a long time, Pulitzer Prize winner, and he knows what he's doing. I still would like to ask him, if he were in the room, I'd like, Doug, why 8,000th of a second? That's pretty fast, right? Trump don't move that fast, right? So why 8,000th of a second? But little piece of photography trivia there. All right, become an MVP. How to elevate your game, all right? If there's any more questions there, Seth, just bat them out to me. All right. Tips to elevate your game. Oh, by the way, Eli Manning, after winning the Super Bowl in 2009 against the Patriots, MVP of that game, and then Derek Jeter, Jorge Posada, and Mariano Rivera. Okay, background check. All right, I started to talk to you a little bit about background. Busy backgrounds are going to ruin your pictures. So it's part of the composition, right? Composition is the organization of elements within your photo. Keep those backgrounds as clean as possible, right? A bad, noisy, distracting background can really ruin your photos. Hockey's really bad, right? There's advertising everywhere. It's like really hard in hockey not to get a busy background. Football can also be challenging, soccer as well. So sometimes that higher angle is really good. There's a picture from actually when the Devils were playing in Brendan Byrne, right? The Jeep logo there just bothers me to no end, right? This was after a player on the team scored a hat trick. They throw hats on the ice, kind of a cute thing they do in hockey. But that Jeep sign is just, nothing against Jeeps, but that sign is there really bothering me. Nice high level position, right? And so you get the nice clean background, which I like, but you don't really see his face. So sometimes there are some trade-offs with those high elevated positions. Generally, your batting average will be higher in a higher elevated position. It's easier to focus. The focus will be a little bit less critical. But I like the backgrounds, but I missed kind of the intimacy of being down at field level. For years, I was trying to make this picture, right, of a player doing something in the middle of that Jets logo. Right, for all my Jet fans out there, Jeff, you know who I'm talking about. They have logos in addition to all the advertising in the background there. And so I was always trying to get a really nice composition in the middle of that Jets logo. And this is the best one that I had come up with. So you can get creative with the backgrounds as well. All right, I talked about that shallow depth of field. Shallow depth of field is the range of focus within your photo. So you have photos that have great depth of field where everything's sharp, and you have shallow depth of field where just a narrow part that you as a photographer decide what you want to be in focus. I love shallow depth of field photography with sports. Why? Because it separates the player or the action from the background. This was shot with a 400 millimeter lens, Phil Simms. Turned out to be his last game ever against the 49ers out in San Francisco. And he's only about 10, maybe 15, 20 feet from me, and he's all bloodied, right? Very dramatic. But this was shot with a really long lens at a very close proximity. Manual focus days, by the way, right? For those of you of a certain age, you had to manually focus, and your batting average was significantly lower then. But I just love how you don't even see, it looks like it was shot in a studio, you don't even see the crowded stadium at Candlestick Park there in the background. Shallow depth of field. Another shallow depth of field photo, Darryl Strawberry, many years ago. I shot this earlier in my career. This was the badass in the New York Mets of the 80s. Lots of attitude out there in Queens. I love this picture of Darryl. Right, and then Tiger Woods here, right? This is at the US Open out in Bethpage on Long Island. I love the shallow depth of field and also caught a little bit of nice light reflecting off his golf club there. All right, find your signature move, right? Perfect your playbook, right? So here are some tips that you can do. Try something different. Throw a changeup, right? Experiment with different shooting techniques. Don't try the same old thing. I used to cover sports and I'd see photographers in the same spots game after game after game. Why? Well, they worked for a news organization that was expecting that they were going to produce work, right? Of course, you have to do that. But the sameness of it used to bother me, and I used to like really struggle to try and shoot from the same spot, so I would try to move it around a little bit. I was always looking for something fresh to separate my work. And then look for the game changers, right? You know, pivotal moments and outcomes that tell the intense stories, right? It doesn't always have to be an action picture. Look for something that's going to tell the outcome or the storyline. And then be a good critical editor. The post-game analysis, it's all about the editing, the pictures you decide to use. In preparing this presentation today, I found a bunch of pictures where for years I had always thought that I had picked the best picture from a shoot. And then I go back and look at the original take, and I always find pictures I like better. Why? Well, maybe it's fresher now, or maybe I'm a little bit more seasoned, but be really, really ruthless with your editing. I am not a great editor of my own work. I feel I'm a really good editor of other people's work. Why? I think that's true with a lot of people because you're so caught up in the making of the pictures. You know, my former photo editor used to say, it's not about the climb to the top of the mountain. The audience doesn't care about how difficult it took you to get there. They only want to see what you saw up there, right? And so don't bother or bog down your audience with the climb. Just give us the goods from what it was like all the way out the top. Here are a couple of pictures where I didn't really notice anything when I was shooting, but when in the editing, I found pictures that I really liked. So there's a picture of Paul O'Neill with the Yankees. I love the fans kind of vignetting and framing him there. It's a little bit different there. Oh, and this is like one of my all-time favorite pictures. A bunch of years ago, the baseball players went on strike. You all remember that? There was no World Series one year. And when the players came back, they were really trying to win over the fans. So the players were constantly throwing the balls into the stands. And I love this. My former colleague, Pete Monsi, saw this picture of mine. He's like, you got to crop the fans out and just show the shadows. And it was a great tip. And I really love how you don't see the fans other than maybe a hand or two, and you just see the shadows. A little bit of creative editing there as well. And then here's a local sports picture. It's a story about a top pitcher. And I just love the peekaboo aspect going on in the picture. It's just one of those things that I saw in the editing and thought it really stood out. Again, the takeaway here is be critical with your editing and look for things that are going to be different. If you're covering the first game at the new Yankee Stadium, you're going to need a picture that shows that. So you got to think, right, well, what would be a good way to show that? So during the national anthem, I went up to the very top row directly behind the stadium. I'm not the first photographer that's ever done that, but it felt like it worked for this particular story, and you get that nice lattice work that's very iconic at Yankee Stadium, kind of setting the top part of the frame there. I really like the composition of that picture as well. And then this picture here, not the greatest picture I ever shot, but the story behind it was really good. And this came from me doing my homework. Right, so this is a picture of Derek Jeter. He's in spring training down in Florida, and the Yankees had just signed Roger Clemens. Well, Roger Clemens was known before he came to the Yankees, and even when he came to the Yankees, he was known for being a guy who was pretty rough as a pitcher. He'd beam guys. He'd hit batters all the time. And when he was on another team, he used to hit Jeter all the time. So on this particular day, Clemens was pitching batting practice, and Jeter, as a joke, put on all this extra equipment to go take batting practice against Clemens, and it was a really, really funny moment that I think a lot of people weren't really aware of the backstory there. And again, I really take pride of knowing the story that I'm covering and try to look for ways to illustrate that in a particular story. I talked about different angles, right? That is me on the roof of Giant Stadium looking for a different angle. So I got special permission to go up on the roof, and that was a photograph taken of me on the roof by my colleague Tyson Trish, and I got this picture. And so I really love the unusual angle here. Looking down, this is a super long lens, zooming down, probably a 600 with a 2x, I think. And nice different action, different perspective. Love that picture a lot. And then this is a picture that I can't really take credit for the idea, but the golf writer I used to work with said he was doing a profile on this golfer who had gotten holes in one, I think, on 2 days in a row, which is highly unusual. And so he's like, let's find a way to get a camera inside a golf hole. And I was like, oh, dude, you can't do this. This was back in the days when they didn't have like GoPros and things like that. So I built like a little piece. I got a piece of sod. I cut a hole in it with a coffee can, attached the coffee can underneath to create like a little funnel. That's me on the ground there, shooting up through the funnel. And then I had my sports writer friend, Greg Matura, there holding my light. So So a little bit of a creative, fresh approach to picture taking there. Slow shutter speeds, nothing you can try as well. I would not recommend shooting slow shutter speeds when you first get to a sporting event, but experiment a little bit. So there's a picture of Dwight Gooden, really slow shutter speed while he's delivering a pitch there. You can also experimenting with panning, where you're moving the camera with a slow shutter speed along with the action, zooming, multiple exposures. Oh, so a great multiple exposure photograph just yesterday. Paul Rutherford, a Boston-based photographer. This is not a Photoshop composite. This is an image made in the camera. 2 separate exposures, 1 frame. Very creative, right? Doesn't have an application for a lot of publications, but it was kind of fun, kind of different, thinking outside the box. Nice job, Paul. I really like that picture as well. And then this picture, this is a project done by Tom Ferrara out on Newsday. I talked to Tom last night. So it was, he was trying to replicate old-time baseball. And so what he did here was he got a 4x5 film camera, and he used a tinnotype process like they did in the 1800s, a long time ago, and created a really cool series of photos and portraits using this antiquated, this old process. And he just won some awards for it. And I really applaud the creativity here and their different approach to visual storytelling there. Tom's a brilliant photographer, and I just love his treatment and his thinking behind that. Really good example of throwing a change up and getting outside your comfort zone and trying something different. Also a great follow on Instagram, as is Paul Rutherford. I've included their Instagrams on all these posts there. He's at Paul Rutherford _ and Long Island's own is Tom Ferrara. All right. Jean Fruth, photographer whose work I really love. Also a great follow on Instagram. She's at Jean Fruth Images as well as Grassroots Baseball. And she's not only a great photographer, she's carved out this whole niche. And I don't know Jean. I'm just familiar with her work. She's carved out this whole niche of covering grassroots baseball, just like the name suggests. But she also covers a wider range of baseball as well. And the pictures are really fresh. And, whoops, I'm sorry. Sorry, Jean, I got the wrong URL there. Give me a second here. I'll cue that up. And what's good to note about Jean is that she's carved out her whole identity, right? People now know her for the work that she does. That's a picture of her there. And she did a really good photo essay recently on women playing baseball in Cuba. I'm sorry, Jean, I had it queued up and I lost track of it. That might be it now. But just a wonderful photographer here, and a good follow on Instagram and grassroots photography as well. Lots of young kids playing baseball. I love baseball, and her work is really pretty awesome. Okay, so, sorry. Oh, you're not seeing my Instagram there. Oh, sorry, my bad. Let me get out of that. There we go. Jean, there you go. There's Jean. Sorry about that. Can you all see that now, Seth? Yeah. So good follow on Instagram. Carved a niche, has a real identity with baseball and local baseball, and she's also gone to, like I said, Cuba and done a lot of great work there as well. I apologize, Jean. I had a really good series of yours queued up. Wow, good composition, right? Some of the things we talked about here, shallow depth of field, right? Nice use of backgrounds in all her pictures. Really wonderful photographer, great aesthetic. Hey, Seth, how much time do we have left? All right, excellent. Another photographer whose work I wanted to point out is my friend Danielle Parzikaran. I also struggle with her last name. Danielle works with the Boston Globe, and not only is she a great sports photographer, her compositions in particular are really, really special. And I was talking to her and preparing this presentation, and she said what she likes to do is get there early and look for where the light is going to be best. So like here, for example, and she's covered the Olympics. I know we have the Olympics coming up. Also covered a good amount of tennis, but just the use of light, right? And the special way in which she caps our images. She says she likes to expose for the highlights. So what does that mean? In a lot of her photographs, you're gonna have lots of dark shadows, right? And so the shadows are going to be really, really dark, not a lot of detail in those particular shadows. Let me go back to Danielle's homepage. A really good example, right? We were talking about cropping and editing your pictures before. Sorry, my bad. Here we go. There we go. There's Danielle's photos. I apologize for that. Right. Great use of composition, light, right? Being really ruthless also with the editing of the pictures. Look how clean her compositions are, right? Everything is in its proper place here. Really clean compositions, beautiful use of light and shadow there as well. I want to find another one. Tennis, right? A lot of her tennis, beautiful light, right? So there, you can only get, that kind of picture if you're going to make your camera exposure based on the highlights. If you expose for the shadows here, yeah, you're going to get shadow detail, but you won't get that same kind of dramatic effect. And at the US Open out in Queens, this is a really good place to do that, especially late in the afternoon. The light is really, really dynamic. Danielle's a really great photographer, a really good follow also on Instagram as well. And that's her Instagram handle right there. All right. And then the last photographer I'm going to show is Bob Sabo, Robert Sabo. Last 2 years, he was Sports Photographer of the Year in New York here, and a really talented, creative guy. And I like how, particularly his black and white photos. Seth, can you see that there? Yeah. There we go. I love his black and white. He doesn't know I'm showing his pictures here, but I just really look forward to when I see posts on his Instagram, right? And look at the really nice kind of visceral quality to his photos. Really stands out, right? So here's a good way for you to build your brand, build your own kind of niche, and draw attention that way here. Great faces and reactions as well. Silver Halide dude, it's his follow on Instagram. Really great photographer. Covers a lot of sports here in New York, where there are lots of good sports shooters as well. A nice series there. I like seeing his posts on Instagram also. Okay, so a couple of other things before we go to taking questions here. You got to stay sharp, right? How do you get good at this? Well, you got to practice, right? You've got to practice. You've got to go out there and start making pictures. Make mistakes, learn from your mistakes. It's really that simple, folks. You've got to get in the game. You've got to go and try it and practice and get experience any way you can. Also, keep up with the latest equipment, right? There are improvements on gear all the time. Stay abreast of that and get the best gear that you possibly can. Find a mentor, right? I mentor a lot of young photographers, one of my favorite things to do. I remember early part in my career, I had great mentors. And so find somebody who can give you feedback and is going to give you the real dope, right? If you're not really working hard or cutting it, you've got to find a really good mentor to give you some feedback. And so I can't emphasize enough how important that is. These are 2 pictures at a workshop that I run at Montclair State every year. We bring high school students with cameras in their hands, and we get them out there making pictures. And the joy that I see in young people when they have a real camera in their hands is really priceless. Team up, right? So you're trying to build your brand, trying to get some experience at the same time. Find what other photographers are doing. Share tips, make friends, join online groups as well, and share information. For years, Sports Shooter was a great community of sports photographers. It doesn't exist anymore, but communities like that exist in a little bit more micro sense on Instagram and other places as well. And as I mentioned before, you got to study, right? If you're going to just think it's going to magically come to you, it's probably not going to happen for you. You got to build up a visual vocabulary. Right? And by studying good photography, and I just shared with you some of my inspirations, I check out their work all the time. And use social media smartly. Follow the people who do the work that you aspire to do. Right? Find the people who are in the position to potentially hire you. Find the people who do work that's going to get you thinking. Bob Sabo, Gene Fruth, these are Danielle Karen, all photographers that I find very inspiring, and when I see their pictures, gets me excited about making my own pictures. So, mentors, find organizations, peer mentoring in particular, and start studying and following people. The other thing you can do is self-assign work to yourself. This is something I do all the time. I'm not really shooting a lot of sports these days, right? So I self-assign, right? So I find something that I'm really interested and I go produce a body of work. I also write my own story so it's a little bit more marketable if you can write your own piece, right? But find a local event or a local team. You could start really low level, your local high school, for example, and see if you can get access. The access is generally very good with local sports. So that's an opportunity to build a relationship and get your feet wet shooting photos. Find a personal project, a passion project. I'll show you an example of that in just a second. And another good thing that you can do is just find a story that you could document like a journey, right? A story that changes or transforms over time. It could be a player that maybe has a challenge or a handicap. It could be somebody who's competing for the Olympics. It could be somebody who's overcoming some sort of hardship like an addiction or maybe some sort of illness. These are the types of stories that make for good photo essays. So self-assign yourself, right? Produce a body of work. I cover basketball games at my university all the time. To stay sharp, I get an opportunity to stay fresh and try new techniques. This was a piece about a tennis player who only had one arm. And it was a really interesting story how he was able to kind of manage playing on a competitive level with his handicap. Went to Cuba earlier this year, boxing in Cuba. Wow, it was just, I found this gym. They let me hang out and make pictures throughout the course of a day, and the pictures were just great. I mentioned before how much I love photographing boxing, right? The grit, the toughness, the organic elements of it just really makes for good photographs. I've never met a boxer who wasn't cool with you making their pictures. Find a gym, particularly find a gym in an inner city area, ask to make pictures, and just show up and make pictures. You try to find some interesting light while you're there and start making some pictures. So these were all made at this one gym down in Havana. I really liked this, posted several of these on my Instagram, which led to, I have a photo exhibit in September at a gallery of all my pictures from Cuba, just not the boxing ones. How did that come about? Well, I self-assigned something, right? I treated it like an assignment, published it on my Instagram, and got some recognition as a result of it. Right? Really good stuff in shooting boxing. And then one other passion project of mine is Hinchliffe Stadium in Paterson. So this isn't a story per se about sports competition or athletics in general, but it's about a historic stadium. Paterson's Hinchliffe Stadium is one of only a handful of stadiums that hosted Negro League Baseball during the period of segregation. And it had a really regal background. It was built during the 1930s as a public works project, and it was the pearl of the city of Paterson. But as the city declined, so did the stadium. And it fell into deep, deep disabandonment and was going to be demolished. And then it was just like a wonderful place to photograph, but it was really sad at the condition that it had deteriorated into. And so over several years, I had made these pictures, waiting for the story to have kind of like an outcome. And then the city got a dynamic new mayor, Andre Saya, and he made this one of his projects to renovate the city, and he came up with creative ways to pay for it. He got the governor to donate, to match tax credits from the city, and then they didn't tear it down, they rebuilt it. And now they have this, and by the way, there were kids in the neighborhood no longer playing baseball, they're playing cricket there. And so the stadium, when it was renovated, turned into a multi-purpose stadium. And Larry Doby, the Hall of Famer, who's from Paterson, got his start there. This is his son, Larry Doby Jr. So in April last year, the stadium reopened to much fanfare. And it's this really cool multi-purpose stadium now that serves the city. It's also home to the New Jersey Jackals, which is an independent league, minor league team. And it's a really cool place to go and make some pictures. Not difficult to get a press pass there. I would just show up and ask to speak to a media relations person. They use it for other events. There's a large Middle Eastern Muslim community in Paterson. They held Eid services there, right? And so it's kind of cool the way they use it in different ways. The Yankees held an event, a Hope Day event there as well. So there's lots of cool activities there, but the underlying theme is this Negro League Baseball and Larry Doby, who is there's a street named after him there. And there's a museum there that kind of tells his story. And there's another drone shot that I had made of the stadium. It's also part of the national park. You could see the Paterson Great Falls on the lower left there. And drone photography is a really good tool to have in your toolkit. I'm going to skip through the next part here because I'm going a little bit short here on time. I want to get to your questions here. But local sporting events can be a really exciting way to make pictures. And you get great access, right? Here's a state championship. Dwan Wagner won the championship for Camden, and it was mayhem on the court after the game. Was able to gather my gear and make a really cool picture of the state championship there. You can go into the stands, which is something you can't do at a professional event. And of course, you just have this really cool access with local events. And it's also an opportunity for you to practice, build a portfolio, and build relationships as well. So the last thing I'll talk about is you got to kind of market yourself. You got to build your brand, and you got to figure out a way as how you're going to make a living or you're going to do this professionally. It's not easy. There's a lot of competition out there, and many of the sports outlets like Sports Illustrated have gone by the wayside or are mere shells of their former self here. So build a good online portfolio, post on social media, tag people, build online relationships, use social media as a way to amplify your work and your stories. And good things, I believe good things happen as a result. And be consistent with it, and also use it as an opportunity to show people, if you're going to go cover a local event, you show them your Instagram, show them that you're actively involved in doing this kind of work. Because if you're not able to show a potential employer, or someone's going to hire you, or even a media relations person, if you haven't shown you've done any work, they're not going to take you seriously. Right? They're going to say, what have you done? Right? And so you've got to show them some work. Bruno Mars' picture from the Super Bowl, MetLife Stadium, best halftime show ever at the Super Bowl. So, post-game interview. So who's got some questions for me? I want to see we got any good questions here in the tip, on the YouTube, and anybody here in the audience. Hit me up, stump me, give me a good question.
Monica's asking tips for improving swim competition photography.
Swim, oh wow. So that is a tough sport. Why? Because one, it's kind of dark. Two, the players are in the water, so it's kind of hard to see faces. So I've photographed swimming several times to a moniker of success. Playing around with shutter speeds can also be effective, right? So if you drag the shutter in swimming, you can kind of get that smooth effect sometimes. Panning can also be good, but make sure you're exposing for facial tones and not the brightness of the water. So exposure can be a challenge, focus can definitely be a challenge, and capturing faces and that emotion can also be a challenge. And also, the angles in which you choose when shooting swimming vary greatly. So figure out what's going to give you the best stuff. We're like the things that we've talked about, the best angle. Sometimes an elevated position, if available, might be good, but you may not be able to see the faces. Getting low, it might be a good way to go. And of course, if you have the equipment, get in the pool with them. Great sports photographer, Al Bello. I forgot to mention Al. Al does lots of underwater sports photography. The guy is just a brilliant photographer, and that's one of the things he does really brilliantly. Check him out. Remember I was talking about studying. You got to study. Find the people who do the work that you aspire to do, and that is a really good way to learn. Questions? Yes?
At what age did you start?
What age did I start? That is a great question. So I went to art school. And and in art school I picked up photography because I thought it would be an easy class. And I took photography, this is back in the days when we worked in dark rooms, and I just fell in love with the process. I was always a creative person. I was very artistic in high school, and I loved the immediacy of photography, right? So I used to draw and paint and sculpt, but it took time. Right? And I'm kind of impatient, right? And so I also didn't like the loneliness aspect of creating art by yourself. Photography gave me an opportunity to interact with people, to go places, right? I got out of college, I got a job working for a small newspaper, and next thing I know I was covering jet games and giant games, and I was like getting like these great opportunities, not only to be at the events that I would typically be watching on television anyway, but to make pictures. So man, I had a press pass, I had a camera, and I had access to sporting events. Nothing could be better. And so I started professionally when I was in college. I got a job working in a darkroom, worked my way through college, working in a darkroom 30 hours a week. At night, when a lot of my friends were out partying, I was at the newspaper printing photos that would be in the paper the next day. And that was really exciting to me. That was like a kind of like an internship for me. And through that job, I met somebody who hired me right after I graduated from college. I built a relationship. Make friends wherever you go, right? Don't burn any bridges, always constantly networking with people. And I networked with somebody who remembered me from when I worked in the darkroom. He was looking for a young, energetic photographer, and he hired me. And he didn't hire me because I didn't have a great portfolio, and I certainly didn't have experience, but attitude, right? Attitude is everything. And he hired me on attitude and the fact that he remembered me. And then, recently I've been archiving my old negatives. I went back and found some pictures I took when I was just a teenager, 10, 12 years old, when I had my first camera, and I didn't even know anything about photography. And I look at my pictures and I was like, damn, those pictures are pretty good. And so I feel like there was a part of me that was like very intuitive visually, and I made good pictures before I even knew what I was doing. Oh, it's funny you mentioned that. Just recently on my Instagram, I posted a short series of the very first pro sporting event I ever covered. It was the New York Knicks. I was a senior in college. These are the series, right? So that is two Hall of Famers, Patrick Ewing and Moses Malone, Mo. And these are the very first pictures that I shot. Black and white film, manual focus, Madison Square Garden. And I just remembered thinking, man, this is great. I'm sitting courtside. I played basketball in college. I played at Purchase College, where we shared a gym with the Knicks when I was in college. And I knew these guys because they would be in the same gym, not at the same time. And to be courtside, and here, before I really even knew what I was doing, here I am. I'm moving. I got behind the bench. You would never, I don't think you'd be able to do this today. Security wouldn't let you get back there, right? It's the head coach, Rick Pitino. And Rick Carlisle is now an NBA coach. And I got behind the bench. I shot some wide sports action shots, right? Manu Bol, the tallest player in the NBA, next to Muggsy Bogues, the shortest player in the NBA. So man, I was like living the life. That was, the great Bernard King, my favorite, all-time favorite basketball player. Did I answer your question? All right. Other questions?
So in the course of your career, I'm sure that you've shot different sports. At any point you got an assignment and you don't know that sport in and out? Like you know basics? How did you prepare for it?
Yeah, great question. I covered cricket. The question was, are there any sports that I was assigned or I had to cover that I wasn't familiar with the sport? Cricket. And it wasn't a professional cricket match, but man, I had no idea. Ball's going in all sorts of directions. I was expecting it to be more like baseball, and it wasn't. And so I did what I typically did early in my career is I found somebody else who was photographing it, who looked like they knew what they were doing. I made friends, right? And I just kind of, learned by watching what they were doing. Great strategy for all types of sports photography, actually any kind of photography. If you're at an event and somebody's there who's got more experience than you, introduce yourself, ask them for tips, and kind of learn by watching. Yeah, that would be a good one. What other sports? I spent so much time covering the big three that I haven't really spent a lot of time. Golf. Oh, I got a great golf story. Early in my career, I was covering golf. It was the U.S. Senior Open, right? And so one of the things I said earlier is you got to know the rules, right? If you get a press credential, you can't run on the field, right? You got to know what the rules are, right? And I was really green early in my career, and I got assigned to cover golf. Well, I was a golfer. I knew golf, but I didn't know you couldn't shoot your camera while they were getting ready to hit the ball. You had to wait for them to strike the ball. And so I'm looking for a photograph while I'm talking here. And so I'm shooting a practice round. Thank God it was a practice round and not an actual round. And it was 3 legendary players practicing. My friends have heard me tell this story before. This is the legendary Gary Player, who was a South African golfer, iconic player. And so I'm shooting the practice round between him, Jack Nicklaus, and Lee Trevino, right? 3 legendary golfers. And here I am like some kid with a camera. And they're in a practice round. I start shooting pictures while Gary Player is lining up for the putt. Well, he heard my camera, he stepped away from the ball, he's giving me like the Kavorka, and so I was like, I did something wrong, and so I backed away, and then he got back over his ball and he made his putt, and then the players then go on to the next hole, so I follow him on to the next hole. Well, he comes up next side of me and he goes, "Don't you ever do that again," and he said it in a way that nobody else really heard. But frightened me. And I was like, what are you talking about? And he's like, I see everything. He's like, you can't move. When you're on the green, hold still, hold your spot, and don't shoot until I strike the ball. And I was like, yes, sir. And so I learned a valuable lesson. I was embarrassed, but I learned a lesson. I never made that mistake again. Well, actually, I did make that mistake again, but because sometimes you got to break the rules to get a good picture. But yeah, that was definitely one of the rules to follow. Other questions? Come on, Jeff, you got to have a question.
I was going to say, talk about your internship as your stepping stone to your profession. When you did your independent study.
At the newspaper?
No, when we traveled.
So my friend Jeff was here. He and I traveled cross country, and we both got college credits for doing that. But that wasn't sports. But it was a really good opportunity. But the lesson of that particular trip, which can kind of tie back to the sports discussion, is you gotta get out of your comfort zone, right? If you're photographing something that is not stressing you out a little bit, you're probably not challenging yourself, right? And nothing good. There's no good work done in the comfort zone, right? You've got to become comfortable with the uncomfortable. And what I mean by that is push yourself, challenge yourself, go do something different. Right, like that Gary Player story I told you, I was delighted to be there, but I really didn't know what I was doing yet, right? I was really learning my craft, and I got a little bit embarrassed, but I learned, right? And so I went and shot the rest of the tournament, and I know I got good pictures, and here I am many years later, but I think the overall lesson from that is, don't be afraid to get out of your comfort zone, for sure. Any other questions online?
Last question is it weird to love sports photography but not love the sports?
I'm sorry, Seth, say it again?
Is it weird to like the photography aspect but not the actual sport?
Oh, great question. All right, okay. So here's the secret that I've waited to the end to share with you all, which is that, yes, it's really exciting to get a press pass and have a good camera and lens and get sideline access and shoot sports. The truth of the matter is, it's hard, it's long, it's tedious. The days are excruciating long. My colleagues who shoot sports on a regular basis, it can be a grind. You need to be at a stadium hours before the game. You're usually there a couple of hours after the game, transmitting or archiving your photos. And so the dark side of that is that it's hard work, and the days are really long. I've showed you some of my World Series photos and Super Bowls. Those are like 18-hour days, right? And like excruciatingly long days where you're making pictures and getting to the stadium early. My favorite assignment, by the way, was this Super Bowl. I think we arrived at the stadium. Alicia Keys did the pregame show. I think we got at the stadium at like 9 in the morning. Kickoff was like 6 in the afternoon, and I don't think we wrapped up until well after midnight. And I really wanted to show this group of photos because this is the best sporting event I ever photographed. The pictures were just great. And you might remember the Patriots were undefeated that year, and the Giants were heavy underdogs. And being a Giant fan, and I'm actually a Giant fan and a fan of any team playing the Patriots, and so I had a special interest in this game. And then it just turned out great for the Giants. It turned out great for photographers. They didn't issue a lot of press pass. Sideline access was really good for this game. And I just had lots of really good pictures throughout the game. For those of you who remember this game, there was one, remember I said before, you got to get the important play, the critical play. Well, the critical play in this game was David Tyree, the wide receiver, catching the ball, pinning the ball against his helmet with only a few minutes left in the game. It was the pivotal play in the game. That's David Tyree. So he had made this incredible catch. I'm going to skip ahead to these photos of Tyree. I'm a little out of sequence here. As you can see, there were lots of great action pictures. So this is Manning escaping the pass rush. There's only a couple of minutes to go. The Giants are behind. Tyree makes this incredible catch, and it determined the outcome of the game. I'm going to skip ahead here. And do you know, when Tyree made that iconic catch, here was me, right here, switching lenses. And I'm reminded of this every year when the Super Bowl is played on TV, and they show this clip because it's one of the most iconic plays in Super Bowl history. And there I am, right? I'm reminded just how I missed this shot. And I'm telling you, this was the best game I ever shot, but I missed the critical shot. And there I am, right, with my Mets hat and my lens. I'm switching lenses. I had told you Manning, who had gone back to pass, had made this shot, and I had my 400 on him for that. Well, then he throws this long pass downfield, and I had too long a lens. So I'm quickly trying to change this to my short lens. I missed the shot. And so my shooting partner, Tyson Trish, nailed it. That's Tyson there. And disaster was averted. We ended up getting a really good shot of it, but I didn't get it. I think that's a good point to end on. And that's us at like 2, 3 in the morning on the trophy stand when everybody had gone home. So to get back to the question, sports can be a lot of fun. It could also be a real grind. And I got bored. I used to get bored because it was just such, you had to be on at all times. You had to be mindful of the key plays, and you had to avoid distractions. And I get distracted easily. Any other questions? The 40th reunion on Saturday. I think I missed the deadline, but I have my high school reunion this week. You'll have to, I don't know, Bill, I'll have to talk to you offline about that. All right, I want to thank Debbie. I want to thank the APA. I want to thank Adorama for hosting me today. This was a lot of fun for me. It's really special. So I'll show you my contact information one more time here. Feel free to reach out to me. Follow me on social. And let me know if I can help you in either way. All right, thank you all.